The happiest night of the year turned into a dance of death in just 60 seconds. Thousands of people were swaying at a New Year's Eve party, completely unaware that these were the final minutes of their lives. It was New Year's Eve, a magnificent cruise ship glowing with lights, packed with thousands of carefree passengers celebrating. Suddenly, piercing the pitch-black silence of the ocean, a towering catastrophic wave surged directly toward them. When the ship's crew saw it, their throats went dry with terror. Death was racing toward them at a terrifying speed. The wave was so massive that even the captain froze in panic. Sensing the imminent danger, the captain barked an emergency order: "Turn the ship fully!" He wanted the sharp bow of the ship to cut straight through the wave. Meanwhile, an elderly passenger who was about to jump into the sea to end his own life stood paralyzed at the sight of that endless, monstrous wave. Seeing death so close, his desire to die vanished in a flash, and he ran back to save his life. The moment the crew realized time had run out, the entire ship echoed with screams. Time had slipped away like sand, making it impossible to turn the ship. Realizing a collision was inevitable, the crew immediately sounded the danger alarm. The moment this blood-curdling warning echoed in the ears of the singing and dancing passengers, their joy turned into mourning in a heartbeat. The time had come to test the miracle that the world called the unsinkable ship. A stampede broke out among the crowd, but there was nowhere left to hide. Just then, the monstrous wave slammed violently into the side of the ship. Left with no choice, the ship had to face the destruction broadside. Built out of human arrogance, that unsinkable ship stood utterly helpless like a twig against the raw power of nature. Just 1 second, and the entire luxury city upside down. In a single moment, that demon-like wave lifted the massive ship into the air. Every heavy object, cars, pianos, glass, slid uncontrollably to one side. The balance was completely shattered. Within seconds, the ship lost its ability to right itself, and the wave flipped it completely 180 degrees upside down on the water. In the blink of an eye, that luxury cruise turned into a floating graveyard. This horrific disaster instantly claimed a massive number of lives. Some were swallowed by the deep ocean, while others were crushed by heavy iron objects flying through the air. Some fell straight onto the ceiling from great heights, while others were burned alive in the explosions and raging fires of the ship's engine. The biggest twist of the story: the ship did not sink even after flipping completely upside down. Look at the miracle of fate! Inside the ship, there were several airtight ballast chambers that hadn't filled with water. The trapped air in these rooms acted like a massive life jacket, keeping the gigantic ship afloat. Its sinking was delayed for a while, and it remained floating upside down on the surface of the sea. Red emergency lights pierced the darkness, and the battle to save loved ones began. Just then, the ship's backup generator kicked in, revealing the horrific horror of their surroundings to the survivors. In the midst of this hell, a mother named Anna was frantically searching for her lost son. Suddenly, an elderly man searching alongside her spotted something in the distance. The child wasn't dead. He was alive. That innocent child was somehow clinging to a heavy piano. But because the ship was upside down, the floor had become the ceiling, and the boy was dangling in mid-air right over a well of death. If his grip slipped, it meant instant death. The elderly man immediately yelled for help, pulled down a large curtain, and spread it underneath so the child could jump into it. Just then, the injured captain stepped forward to steady the panicked crowd. He announced, "Before dying, the crew managed to send out our emergency location. Help will arrive in a few hours. Just lock the cabin doors, stay calm, and wait." Hearing the captain's words, the terrified passengers slowly began to calm down. But standing in the crowd, Leji, a former naval officer, looked grim. He understood the architecture of ships inside out, and knew that the captain's plan would lead them straight to a watery grave. Instead of following the captain's orders, he decided to climb up alone toward what used to be the bottom of the ship to find a way out. But he wasn't alone. Anna and her son had already noticed his dangerous move. Just then, an elderly architect shouted from the crowd, "Sooner or later, This ship will sink to the bottom of the ocean. The captain's reassurance was completely shattered. Meanwhile, an elderly father was ready to charge into this hell to find his lost daughter. Without wasting a single second, he handed a massive sum of money to a waiter who knew every nook and cranny of the ship. The moment the deal was sealed, they set off on a deadly path. Sensing the danger, Anna also started running after them, clutching her innocent son. Seeing a few people heading upward, panic broke out among the passengers trapped below. The captain immediately grabbed the loudspeaker and shouted, "No one copy them! Stay where you are!" And gripped by fear, he ordered his crew, "Lock all the cabin doors immediately." This meant those below were now trapped forever. In the upper part of the ship, no law remained. There was only screaming, panic, and chaos. People were running blindly. But in the midst of this stampede, the elderly father's daughter, Julie, refused to budge from her spot. The reason? Her fiancé, Xiaojie, was badly trapped under heavy debris and couldn't move at all. Julie alone couldn't even budge that massive debris. Helpless, she stretched out her hands and begged for help from the panicked, fleeing crowd. And right then, a miracle happened. A kind person named Jesse actually stopped out of this selfish crowd. But unfortunately, even though both put all their strength into it, the heavy object didn't move an inch. Suddenly, the smoke alarm activated, and water burst out at a furious speed. The terrifying part was that the water flowed directly toward the bare, snapping electric wires scattered across the floor. The moment the running crowd came into contact with that water, the entire hall was electrocuted in a single shock, and dozens of people died writhing in pain. Right there. Look at the irony. Being trapped under the debris saved Julie and her companions from this current, but their trouble was far from over. In the midst of that horror of electrocution, Julie screamed, "We need an iron rod to make a lever." Hearing this, Jessie resolved to complete this unfinished mission. She told the young couple, "Stay right here," and carefully set off to find tools, dodging the electrified water. Just then, she spotted a broken, heavy iron pipe in the debris. As Jesse moved forward to pick up the pipe, a hand moved from the pile of corpses. A man who had been unconscious had just regained awareness and had luckily escaped the electrocution because of it. Without wasting any time, they all used that iron pipe as a lever, pried up the debris with all their might, and finally dragged Xiaojie out from the jaws of death. Meanwhile, Leja and Anna's group, who were searching for a way out, faced their first major roadblock. The main path leading upward was completely blocked by rubble. But just then, the waiter's eyes fell on a nearby cargo lift used for carrying luggage. Everyone put their remaining strength together and pushed the heavy door of the lift open. The lift cabin was stuck right above their heads, meaning the path was clear, but there was no place to step to get across to the other side. They quickly used their brains and picked up a long wooden bench. By balancing that bench on a thin ledge of the opposite wall, they created a temporary bridge over a well of death. Former naval officer Leji crossed that thin bench first, stepping with extreme caution. He tried to pry open the door opposite using an iron shovel, but there wasn't even a tiny gap between the doors. Applying force was doing no good. Just before giving up, Ledger's eyes caught a half-open lift door on the floor above, and he instantly changed his plan. Ledge took the risk of escaping through the half-open door above. To keep the bench steady below, the elderly father had to step forward. The two swapped places on the narrow bridge and formed a human ladder. Ledger climbed onto the old man's shoulders and managed to reach the top, but nobody noticed that the heavy lift cabin stuck above was now swaying like a shadow of impending death. The women and children had already crossed over. Now, only the waiter and the elderly father, Ma, were left below. Showing his loyalty, the waiter insisted that the old man climb up first. He had no idea that this act of kindness was about to become the biggest mistake of his life. The moment the old man started climbing, the lift shuddered under the heavy weight. With a violent jolt, the lift cabin dropped. The bench acting as their bridge fell away, leaving both men hanging in mid-air. Ledger, standing above, reached out his hand to save them, but due to the double weight, he couldn't pull them up. Just then, the lift above began to completely tear apart. To save his own life and the lives of the others, Lege had to make a brutally cruel and harsh decision in a split second. Hearing the sounds of destruction from the rubble below, the captain assumed that everyone who disobeyed him was dead. But he was wrong. Not only had they safely reached a luxury bar, but the elderly father's search was also over. Ma had finally reunited with his lost daughter, Julie. Everyone drank water there, catching their breath. While everyone else was resting, Leje was searching for a way out. He splashed some water onto a door handle, and it instantly turned into steam and vanished. The handle was terrifyingly hot, meaning a raging fire was trapped behind it. Yet this was their only way up. Clutching fire extinguishers in their hands, everyone held their breath and pushed the door open. Luckily, there was only the intense heat of an explosion, not actual fire. The path ahead was blocked. Now they had to climb up using the mangled iron framework of a broken lift. Everyone showed good sense and sent young Xiaoji ahead to test the path. But just then, the arrogance of a drunk, small-mustached man in the crowd flared up. He taunted, "Why should women and children always go first?" And shoving Julie aside, he carelessly started climbing up himself. As the arrogant drunkard climbed up, a bottle of alcohol slipped from his hand and fell. That single second of carelessness cost him his life. Suddenly, a terrifying sound echoed from above. The floor of the ship, now standing 180 degrees upside down, could no longer bear the weight of the massive engine. The gigantic engine came crashing straight down onto the drunkard, crushing him to pieces in an instant. But the terror wasn't over yet. Diesel began leaking from the wreckage, and stray sparks were catching fire. The path was completely destroyed. Just as the father and daughter were about to say their final goodbyes, having lost all hope, Lega spotted a fire hydrant hose. Without a second thought, Lega dove straight down into the roaring river of fire below. The view from above was terrifying, but Lega knew that since Diesel floats on water, the only real safety lay beneath the surface. Swimming underwater, Lega reached the other side and tightly secured the iron hose, creating a makeshift zipline. Seeing this, the elderly father strapped his daughter Julie onto his back, grabbed an iron hook, and glided through the air right across the river of fire. But just then, another massive blast went off behind them. The explosion shattered the sealed glass of the ship. The screws of the cabin began to rip out one by one. Death and regret were clearly written all over the captain's face. But it was far too late. The very next moment, the ocean water swallowed the entire hull, burying the captain and everyone with him alive. Up above, the backup lights failed, yet again, leaving everyone dependent entirely on flashlights. The moment the survivors went to open the next door, they discovered that the exterior section was already submerged. The water was rising 10 times faster than they had anticipated. Just then, the elderly father's eyes fell on a narrow ventilation duct. With no other way out, everyone began crawling into that tight pipe of death, one by one. Everyone had made it inside the pipe, but a girl named Jessie, who suffered from claustrophobia, froze. Legge forced her inside. As the old man leading the way tried to open the exit hatch, he found it completely jammed tight by screws. Meanwhile, the rising water from behind had already submerged half of Ledge's body. They were all on the verge of being buried alive. Then came another disaster. The exhausted father lost his grip and got badly stuck inside the narrow tube. Jessie screamed in terror. Ledger shouted to calm her down and gave her courage. Risking her own life, Jessie used all her might to push the old man's feet from below, successfully getting him back up to safety. To open the hatch, the old man sent a small child forward, whose slender hand could reach the screws. Using the tool Jessie handed over, the child unscrewed 2 bolts on just one side, and the hatch swung open. Just as Lega was about to suffocate, everyone scrambled out in a rush. But the moment they breathed the fresh air, they froze in shock. The main door ahead was completely locked from the outside. Everyone was now trapped inside the ballast tank, a chamber whose door could only be opened from the outside. Their only chance of survival was a nightmare. They had to fill the tank completely with water so that the mounting water pressure would force the emergency valve open on its own. It was a suicide mission. Lega opened the valve, and the water began to rise. Just as everyone was on the verge of taking their final breath, the door blew open with a terrifying blast, and they were swept away by the roaring torrent. While swimming out, Jessie, who was trailing at the very back, got tangled in a wire mesh. Submerged underwater, she couldn't even cry out for help, and after a desperate struggle, she lost consciousness. By the time they dragged her out, Jessie's breathing had already stopped. As they stood there mourning her, the sound of rhythmic knocking echoed from behind the debris. Everyone thought a rescue team had finally arrived, but it was nothing more than a swinging telephone receiver banging against the wall. They finally made it near the propeller shaft, their ultimate escape route, but right then, the ship tilted violently, submerging the path underwater. Suddenly, a chain of explosions ripped through the vessel, tossing the entire cruise ship into the air like a pendulum. In this horrifying onslaught of debris and rushing water, Anna and her innocent son were swept away. The group fractured into two. The old man led the rest forward, while Lega dove headfirst into the jaws of death to save the mother and child. Meanwhile, the rest of the group successfully reached the topmost deck. The old man was about to rush outside impatiently when a terrifying vortex of air suddenly whipped up. A malfunction in the control room had caused the propeller, the massive fan, to spin backward, violently sucking the outside air and anything near it inward. Stepping forward meant being chopped to pieces instantly by the propeller blades. There was only one way left. Someone had to dive into the deeply submerged control room to shut down the propeller. Young Xiaoja said a tearful goodbye to his fiancée Julie and prepared to plunge into the water. But right then, a scream escaped Julie's lips. Because to save the young couple, the elderly father had already slipped silently into that deep, freezing, watery grave to draw his final breath. Meanwhile, Lege was still frantically searching the wreckage for Anna's son. Lege couldn't find the opening through which the boy had been swept into the iron cage. Before his eyes, the rising water swallowed the entire section. Driven to utter despair and completely broken, Anna couldn't bear to witness the horrific sight of her child's death. Screaming in agonizing pain, she broke through the water surface and began to weep uncontrollably. Meanwhile, deep underwater, the elderly father had reached the control room. He had sacrificed himself for his daughter's life. But the moment he got inside, he was struck with horror. The main switch was completely shattered. His final breaths were slipping away, but just before his spirit broke, he gathered every ounce of his remaining strength and slammed the button to reverse the propeller. The moment the propeller spun backward, a massive, violent suction of air was unleashed. Leggy instantly understood the old father's plan. They had to jam this fan. They threw a heavy gas cylinder into it, but it got stuck sideways right at the opening. The suction was so terrifyingly dangerous that the cylinder wouldn't budge no matter what. With no options left, Ledger gritted his teeth and surrendered himself to that horrifying pull. He was sucked flying toward the fan and kicked the cylinder straight inside. The very next split second, a heart-stopping, massive explosion ripped through. The propeller was blown to shreds, and the ship began to sink rapidly. But the path was clear. Without wasting a single second, the survivors scrambled through the pipe and leapt onto the surface of the sea. They climbed onto a nearby floating life raft and began rowing like madmen, because the real nightmare was still to come. When a ship so massive sinks, it creates a terrifying vortex of water around itself, known as ship suction. This suction drags everything in its vicinity down into the abyss. Fortunately, these people used every bit of their strength to row out of that danger zone. And at that exact moment, the Titanic cruise ship was buried forever in the depths of the ocean. After facing countless horrific dangers and the ultimate sacrifices of their loved ones, a mere handful of people made it out of this hell alive. And just like that, the luxurious Poseidon, which once boasted it would never sink, lost all its glory to the wrath of nature and became a tragic tale of total destruction. This story of the end of human arrogance finishes right here.